The wind bit like broken glass across the Montana plains. James Carson felt it through 3 layers of wool and leather, through the red bandana wrapped tight around his throat, through the very marrow of his bones. January 12th, 1883, 7 in the morning, and the world had turned to white iron under a sky the color of old bruises. 50 head of Texas longhorn moved ahead of him like ghosts in the snow, their breath rising in clouds that froze and fell as ice crystals. 6 miles to Ashford Creek. 6 miles and they could all rest. The cattle were stumbling now, their legs punching through snow that came up past their knees. Another night in this cold would kill half of them. Flint, as most men called him, guided his horse Dusty with pressure from his knees alone. His hands were tucked under his arms, trying to keep feeling in his fingers. The quarter horse beneath him was 8 years old, steady as stone, and worth more than most men Flint had known. The animal's brown coat was crusted white with ice, his mane stiff with frozen sweat. Ashford Creek appeared through the curtain of blowing snow like a sketch done in charcoal from 15 wooden buildings, maybe 20. Smoke rose from some of the chimneys, but not all. Flint counted them from habit. Fewer plumes than structures. That meant families doubled up for warmth, or folks who had given up and moved on, or people too poor to afford firewood. None of it was good. He tied Dusty to a hitching post outside what looked like a general store. The horse nickered softly, exhausted. Flint ran a hand down the animal's neck, checking for the telltale lumps of snow packed into the hooves. Snowballing, the old cowboys called it. Could lame a horse in an hour. Dusty was clean. Good boy. That was when Flint heard the crowd. It was the wrong kind of sound for a winter morning. Too many voices, too much heat in the cold air. He had heard crowds like this before in Little Rock, in Abilene, and a dozen forgotten towns across the West. A crowd that had convinced itself it was righteous. A crowd that had found something to hate. Flint's hand went to his Winchester Model 1873, checked the load by feel. 15 rounds of .44-40 caliber. The rifle was 20 years newer than him and had never jammed. His Colt Peacemaker sat heavy on his right hip. 6 rounds, always loaded, hammer on an empty chamber for safety. The knife, 9 inches of Sheffield steel with a hickory handle, rode in a sheath at the small of his back. He walked toward the sound. The crowd had formed a circle in the town square, 30 yards from the white-painted church. 32 people, maybe more. Men with their hats pulled low, women with shawls wrapped tight, a few children, their faces pale and confused. And at the center of it all, kneeling in the snow, was a woman. Her head had been shaved, badly, with dull shears or maybe sheep clippers, the kind that tore as much as cut. Blood had dried in thin lines down her temple, behind her ear, along the back of her neck. Her hands were bound in front of her with hemp rope, the kind that got stiff as wire when it froze. She wore a gray dress, torn at the shoulder, and no coat. Her breath came in short gasps that turned to fog in the bitter air. A man stood over her, older, maybe 57, dressed in black with a white collar. Preacher. He held the shears in one hand, a fistful of golden hair in the other. As Flint watched, he dropped the hair into the snow. It lay there like something dead. Flint had seen this before. God help him, he had seen this before. The memory came back like a fist to the gut. Summer 1807, Little Rock, Arkansas. His sister Sarah, 20 years old and beautiful as Sunday morning, kneeling in almost the same position. The same rope, the same shears, the same righteous faces watching her shame. He had been 2 days a ride away, pushing cattle through the Ozark Hills. By the time he got the letter, by the time he rode back with his horse half dead beneath him, Sarah was already gone. He found her in the stable, hanging from a rope she had braided herself from old leather reins. Her hair, her beautiful black hair, had still been short, ragged. They had made sure it would never grow back. The letter was in his pocket now, 6 years later. He carried it everywhere. The paper was soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. He did not need to read it to remember every word. Dear James, by the time you read this, I will be with Mama and Papa. Do not blame yourself. You were doing what you had to do. This town killed me long before I tied the rope. They took everything. My job at the schoolhouse, my friends, my future. I loved Patrick. I really did. But love was not enough against their hate. I could not bear seeing their eyes anymore. The way they looked at me, like I was filth. I want you to remember me before all this. When we used to ride horses by the creek, when you taught me to shoot, when I was whole. Live your life, James. Do not let them break you too. Your loving sister, Sarah. Silence in the face of cruelty is cruelty itself. Flint had been silent once. He would not be silent again. He stepped into the circle. The crowd parted without thinking about it, the way cattle part when they smell a wolf. Flint was not a big man, not particularly tall, but there was something in the way he moved that made people step aside. Something that had been forged in 6 years of riding alone, sleeping under stars, and carrying a dead sister's last words against his heart. The preacher looked up. His face was red from cold or exertion or both. He had small eyes, the kind that never looked directly at anything, and thin lips that made a straight line of disapproval. "This is not your concern, stranger," the preacher said. His voice carried the practiced authority of a man used to being obeyed in small places. Flint did not answer. He walked past the preacher and stopped in front of the woman. She did not look up. Her eyes stayed fixed on the snow between her knees, on the blood and the hair scattered there like evidence of a crime. He knelt down, slow and deliberate, until his face was level with hers. Her eyes lifted, gray, the color of river stones or distant rain. They were red-rimmed and exhausted, but not crying. No tears. Either she had run out or she had decided they were not worth spending. When their eyes met, something passed between them. A recognition, not of each other, but of shared pain, of knowing what it meant to be marked by a town's judgment. Flint unslung his canteen from his shoulder. The water inside was half frozen, slushy. He uncapped it with stiff fingers and held it to her lips. She hesitated. Then she drank. Long, desperate swallows. Water spilled down her chin and froze in tiny beads on the torn fabric of her dress. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" The preacher's voice cracked like a whip. Flint set down the canteen. He pulled his knife from its sheath, the blade whispering against leather. The crowd drew back. Someone gasped. But Flint just cut the rope around the woman's wrists. The hemp was so cold and wet it took 3 sawing cuts to get through. When the rope fell away, it left deep purple bruises on her skin, the kind that would take weeks to fade. He stood, shrugged off his long coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The sheepskin-lined duster weighed 8 pounds and cost him 2 months' wages 3 years ago. It swallowed her small frame completely, covering the torn dress, the exposed skin, the marks they had carved into her with their judgment. She pulled it tight around herself, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "You are making a mistake." A new voice. Flint turned. The man wore a sheriff's star pinned to a leather vest. He was maybe 50, thick through the middle, with a face like weathered granite. His hand rested on the butt of a Remington revolver. "She sold herself to a Cheyenne scout," the sheriff said, each word falling like a stone. "Took money, disgraced herself in this town. We marked her so decent folk would know to stay clear." Flint looked at the sheriff, then at the preacher, then at the face in the crowd. He saw what he always saw in moments like this: fear dressed up as righteousness, hate wrapped in the language of Carlin law, people who had decided that cruelty was acceptable as long as enough of them agreed to it. "What Cheyenne was Jaya?" Flint asked. His voice was quiet, conversational, the kind of quiet that made smart men nervous. "Scout named Red Sky," the sheriff said. "He's dead now. Buffalo hunters killed him 3 weeks back near the Yellowstone." The woman's head snapped up. "He's dead?" Her voice was raw, scraped hollow by screaming or crying or both. "Shot in the back," an old woman said from the crowd. She sounded satisfied. "Good riddance to bad rubbish." The woman in Flint's coat made a sound, not quite a more like something breaking inside her chest. "I did not sell myself." Her voice was stronger now, edged with something that might have been rage if she had any strength left for it. "Red Sky paid me to teach him English. $10 a week for 6 weeks. I used the money to pay my brother's debt to the bank." "Lies," the preacher hissed. "You were seen entering his tent after dark." "Because he was dying of pneumonia." The woman tried to stand, swayed, and Flint caught her elbow. She jerked away from his touch, but did not fall. He asked me to write letters to his family, in Cheyenne, because he could barely breathe and I was the only person in this godforsaken town who would help him. Your brother hanged himself, a man in the crowd said. Rancher from the look of his boots. 2 weeks after you gave him that Indian money. Could not live with the shame of what his sister did. The woman went very still. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. My brother hanged himself because he stole from the bank. $200. The sheriff knew but gave him a week to pay it back. She looked directly at the sheriff. I gave Thomas the money Red Sky paid me. $180. It was not enough. And Thomas could not live with knowing what I had done to try to save him. The sheriff's face went red. That's not... He left a note. The woman cut him off. It said the shame was his, not mine. But you people twisted it around. Made it about me. Made it about Red Sky. Because it was easier to blame an Indian and a desperate woman than to admit one of your own was a thief. Someone in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A younger man wearing a deputy's badge on his coat. His face was pale and his eyes would not meet the woman's. That changes nothing, the preacher said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. She still associated with a savage, still took his money, still brought shame to this Christian town. Flint had heard enough. He turned his back on the preacher and faced the woman again. Can you stand? He asked. She nodded. Can you ride? Another nod. Flint bent down, hooked one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her. She did not weigh much, maybe 95 pounds. She stiffened in his arms, her whole body going rigid with surprise or fear or both. Easy, he said, so quiet only she could hear. I have got you. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand moving to his gun. You put her down right now. Flint looked at him over the woman's head. You want to shoot me in front of all these good Christian folk? The sheriff's hand hovered over his Remington. His face worked, anger and calculation warring behind his eyes. He looked at his brother, a hard-faced man standing near the saloon. The brother gave a small nod. Let him go, the brother said. We will get them later. Flint turned and walked toward Dusty. The crowd shouted, surged forward, but no one touched him. Maybe it was the rifle on his back. Maybe it was the way he moved, slow and deliberate, like a man who had already decided what he was willing to die for. Maybe it was just the cold, making people too miserable to commit to violence. He set the woman on Dusty's saddle, then climbed up behind her. She was shaking again, violent tremors that made the horse sidestep nervously. Flint settled her against his chest, one arm wrapped around her waist to keep her steady. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Because someone should have done it for my sister, Flint said, and no one did. He nudged Dusty into a walk. Behind them, the sheriff shouted something, but Flint did not turn around. A gunshot cracked through the morning air. Not aimed to hit, just a warning, a promise. Flint kept the horse moving at a steady walk until Ashford Creek disappeared behind them into the endless white. They rode in silence for an hour. The woman sat rigid in front of him, her hands clutching the edges of his coat like it was the only thing keeping her from flying apart. Flint kept Dusty moving at a pace the horse could maintain, checking their back trail every few minutes. No pursuit yet, but they would come. Men like that always did. The snow started falling heavier around midday. Big flakes, fat as silver dollars. The wind picked up from the north, pushing the temperature down another 10 degrees. Flint's feet were going numb in his boots. He flexed his toes, trying to keep blood flowing. Frostbite was a slow killer, the kind you did not notice until it was too late. There is a trading post, he said, more to break the silence than anything else. About 6 miles west. Used to belong to a trapper I knew. He is gone now, but the place is still standing. We can rest there. The woman did not respond. I will not hurt you, Flint added, and I will not take you back. Her voice came out small and tired. Why? Why what? Why did you do that? You do not know me. Flint was quiet for a moment, watching the snow fall. Do not need to. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. Her face was pale, her lips cracked and bleeding from the cold. The shaved scalp made her look younger than she probably was. Mid-20s, maybe. Hard to tell when someone had been beaten down that far. They will come after you, she said. Maybe. They will kill you. Maybe. Then why? Flint looked down at the top of her head, at the uneven cuts, the dried blood. Because living with yourself after doing nothing is worse than dying. She turned away, but he felt something in her posture shift. Not quite trust, but maybe the beginning of it. The trading post appeared through the snow like a ghost ship. Single room, log walls, shake roof with half the shingles missing. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Windows were broken, but it was shelter, and right now that was worth more than gold. Flint dismounted first, then helped the woman down. Her legs buckled, and he caught her elbow. This time she did not pull away. "Steady," he said. She found her footing, nodded. He tied Dusty to a post that looked like it might hold, then pushed the door open. The hinges screamed. Inside was cold and dark and smelled like mice and rot. But the roof was mostly intact, and there was an old stone fireplace in the corner. "Sit," Flint said, gesturing to a rough cot against the wall. She did, moving like every joint hurt. Probably did. Kneeling in snow for hours would do that. Flint gathered kindling from a pile of old wood in the corner. Some builder long ago had left it stacked and dry. He arranged it in the fireplace, added some birch bark for tinder, and struck his flint and steel. 3 tries and the spark caught. He blew gently on the ember, feeding it air and patience until a small flame licked up. 10 minutes later, he had a fire going. The woman sat near it, still wrapped in his coat, staring at the flames. Flint pulled out his canteen, refilled it with snow from outside, and set it near the fire to melt. While they waited, he checked the woman's feet. "Let me see," he said. She hesitated, then pulled off her boots. They were button-up affairs, old and worn through at the toes. Her feet were pale, almost blue. 3 toes on the left foot were white and hard. Frostbite. First stage, maybe second. Flint worked quickly and quietly. He warmed water from the canteen to body temperature, tested it with his elbow, then had her soak her feet. She hissed in pain when the warmth hit the damaged tissue. That was good. Pain meant the nerves still worked. "It burns," she said through clenched teeth. "That means you are not losing the toes," Flint said. "Bear it." After 20 minutes, he wrapped her feet in his spare flannel shirt, then elevated them on a rolled-up blanket he found in the corner. She watched him work, not speaking, her gray eyes tracking his every movement. "What is your name?" Flint asked. She did not answer right away. Then in "Sarah Ann Hartwell." Flint looked up sharply. "Sarah?" "Yes. Why?" "Nothing." He turned away, busying himself with the fire, but his hand went to his pocket. To the letter there, same name, different woman. Maybe that meant something. Maybe it just meant the world was cruel in predictable ways. "They were not wrong," Sarah said suddenly. Flint glanced at her. "I did take money from Red Sky." "And he did." She stopped, swallowed hard. "We were not just teacher and student." Flint waited. He had learned a long time ago that silence was often the best way to get people talking. "I loved him," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she was reporting on the weather. "He was kind, kinder than any white man in that town ever was. He taught me about his people, about medicine plants and tracking and the old stories. I taught him to read. We taught each other." She looked down at her hands. "My brother owed debts, gambling, drinking. The bank was going to take our land. Red Sky knew. He offered to help. $10 a week if I would teach him English. He needed it to trade with white merchants. It was fair, honest work." "But the town did not see it that way," Flint said. "The town saw a white woman spending time with an Indian." Sarah laughed, bitter and short. "They decided I was selling myself. Decided Red Sky was taking advantage. Never mind that he was dying of pneumonia. Never mind that I was trying to save my family's land." "Your brother?" "Hanged himself 2 weeks after I gave him the money." Her voice did not waver. "In our barn, left a note saying he could not live knowing what I had done for him. The town decided I was the reason. Said I brought shame. Said I corrupted him." Flint poked at the fire with a stick. "Shame is a poison. It kills slower than a bullet, but just as sure." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. "You sound like you know." "I had a sister," Flint said. "Name was Sarah, too. She fell in love with an Irish miner. Got pregnant. The town turned on her, shamed her out of her train, out of her church, out of everything. By the time I got back from a cattle drive, she had hanged herself. Sarah's expression softened. I am sorry. So am I. Flint stood, checked the door. Snow was falling heavier now. Visibility maybe 20 feet. Get some rest. We leave before dawn. Where are we going? Somewhere they will not follow. There is nowhere they will not follow, Sarah said. Not after this. Flint looked at her. In the firelight, with her shaved head and his coat wrapped around her, she looked like a child playing dress-up in grown folks' clothes. But her eyes were old, aged by loss and pain, and the kind of judgment that came from people who should have known better. Then we will keep moving until we find somewhere, Flint said, or until they give up. They will not give up. Then neither will we. Sarah studied him for a long moment. Then she did something he did not expect. She smiled, just a little, just for a second, but it was there. You are a fool, James Carson, she said. Been called worse. He settled down by the door, his Winchester across his knees. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, and somewhere in the distance, men saddled horses and loaded guns and told themselves they were doing the right thing. Flint checked his rifle one more time. 15 rounds. His Colt, 6 rounds. His knife, sharp enough to shave with. It would have to be enough. The fire burned low. Sarah fell asleep sitting up, her head nodding forward, her breath coming slow and even. Flint stayed awake, watching the door, watching the windows, watching the snow pile up against the walls like the whole world was trying to bury them. Just before midnight, he heard it. Dogs barking. Still distant, but getting closer. They had hounds. He should have known. Towns like that always had hounds. Flint stood, moved to Sarah, shook her shoulder gently. Wake up. We need to go, now. She came awake fast, eyes wide. What is it? Dogs, maybe an hour behind us. But the snow. They brought hounds. Snow does not matter to hounds. Flint was already moving, checking gears, stamping out the fire. There is a root cellar, east wall. Has a tunnel that leads out to a gully. We go now. Sarah stood, swaying a little. How do you know about the tunnel? Trapper who lived here was friendly with the Cheyenne, built it as an escape route in case the army came. Flint pulled back the rug in the corner, revealed a wooden hatch. Come on. But Sarah did not move. She was staring at the hatch, her face gone white. Red Sky brought me here, she whispered. 3 months ago. He showed me this tunnel. He said I might need it someday. Flint looked at her. Understanding dawned slow and cold. He knew. He knew they would turn on you. He said white men do not forgive kindness to Indians. Sarah's voice was hollow. He was dying. He knew he was dying, and he was trying to protect me even then. The barking got louder. We can talk about Red Sky later, Flint said. Right now we run. He lifted the hatch. Below was darkness, the smell of earth and old stone. A ladder led down into black nothing. Sarah climbed down first, Flint following with his rifle slung across his back. He pulled the hatch shut behind them, plunging them into absolute darkness. Move forward, he said. Feel along the walls. The tunnel is maybe 40 yards. They crawled through the dark on hands and knees. The tunnel was narrow, barely 3 feet high, the walls rough-cut timber and packed earth. Sarah moved ahead of him, her breathing loud in the enclosed space. Flint came behind, dragging his rifle, listening for sounds of pursuit above them. Halfway through, Sarah stopped. What is wrong? Flint whispered. It is blocked. Part of the ceiling collapsed. Flint felt around in the dark, his hands finding loose dirt and rocks. Not a complete collapse, just a partial one. He started digging with his bare hands, scooping earth behind him. Sarah joined him. Together, they clawed at the barrier, fingers bleeding, nails breaking. 5 minutes. 10. Flint lost track of time in the suffocating dark. Then Sarah's hand punched through into open air. They widened the hole, squeezed through one at a time, and emerged into a shallow gully 20 yards behind the trading post. Snow was still falling. Behind them, they could see the orange glow of torches through the trees. The posse had reached the trading post. Then, brighter light, orange flames licking up the walls. Daniel Marsh's voice carried through the trees. Burn it. Flush them out or burn them alive. They will check for bodies when it cools, Flint whispered. We have maybe 3 hours before they realize we escaped. Sarah was crying now, silent tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. Lucas, she said, the deputy. He tried to warn us. They will know. They will kill him. Maybe. Or maybe he is smarter than we think. They ran. The darkness before dawn was absolute. Flint Carson moved through it like a ghost, one hand on Sarah Hartwell's shoulder, the other holding his Winchester. Behind them, the trading post stood silent and dark. The fire they had built hours ago now reduced to cold ash. Ahead of them stretched miles of frozen wilderness and the promise of pursuit. They had maybe 2 hours before the posse arrived, maybe less if the dogs were as good as Flint feared. The temperature had dropped to 28 below zero. Every breath Flint took felt like broken glass in his lungs. His feet, already suffering from early-stage frostbite, had gone completely numb. He could not feel his toes anymore. That was bad, very bad. But there was nothing to be done about it now except keep moving and hope Ruth McKenna's homestead was where Lucas Brennan had said it would be. Sarah stumbled beside him, and Flint caught her elbow. She was wearing his coat still, the heavy sheepskin duster that weighed 8 pounds and had cost him 2 months' wages. Under it, her torn dress provided almost no protection from the cold. Her feet were wrapped in strips of flannel Flint had cut from his spare shirt, but it was not enough. Nothing was enough in cold like this. How much farther? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. 10 miles, Flint said, maybe 8 if we cut through the valley. I cannot walk 10 miles? Then I will carry you. It was not bravado, it was simple fact. They would reach Ruth's place together or they would die together in the snow. There was no third option. They moved through the forest in silence, following a game trail that wound between towering pines. The trees were so heavy with snow their branches hung nearly to the ground, creating a tunnel of white and shadow. Flint navigated by feel more than sight, one hand outstretched to brush against tree trunks, keeping them on course. The sky began to lighten imperceptibly. Not true dawn yet, just the faintest suggestion that somewhere beyond the clouds and the mountains, the sun still existed. In that gray pre-dawn light, Flint saw their tracks behind them. Deep gouges in the fresh snow, impossible to miss, leading straight back to the trading post like an arrow pointing at their backs. They will follow our trail, Sarah said. She had seen it too. Yes, we should try to hide it. No time. And it would not matter. Hounds do not need tracks. They follow scent. Flint kept them moving. Our only chance is to reach Ruth's place before they reach us. Behind them, distant but growing closer, came the sound Flint had been dreading. Dogs baying, the high, excited yip of hounds that had caught a scent. They were on the trail already, moving fast. Flint picked on pace, half dragging the Sarah through the snow. She did not complain, just set her jaw and matched his stride as best she could. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each exhalation a small cloud of white vapor that froze instantly in the bitter air. An hour passed, then another. The baying of the hounds grew steadily louder. Flint tried to calculate distances and speeds in his head. The dogs could move twice as fast as humans through snow, maybe faster. The men on horseback would be slower, but not by much. They had maybe 30 minutes before the pursuit caught up. Not enough time to reach Ruth's homestead, not at this pace. The forest thinned ahead, opening onto a wide meadow. A frozen creek cut across it, the ice thick and gray under a dusting of new snow. On the far side of the meadow, the trees resumed, dark and forbidding. Flint stopped at the edge of the tree line, studying the open ground. Crossing that meadow would leave them exposed, visible from half a mile away. But going around would add an hour to their journey. We have to cross, he said. They will see us. I know. They ran, or what passed for running in thigh-deep snow while exhausted and half-frozen. Flint went first, breaking trail, and Sarah followed in his footsteps. The meadow seemed to stretch on forever, a vast empty space where they were the only moving things under a sky that was slowly brightening from black to gray. Halfway across, Flint heard the baying change pitch. The dogs had reached the meadow edge, had seen them. Faster, Flint said, though he knew Sarah was already moving as fast as she could. They reached the frozen creek. Flint tested the ice with one foot. It held. He took another step. The ice groaned but did not crack. He took Sarah's hand and they crossed together, moving quickly but carefully. If they fell through into the water below, they would be dead in minutes. Hypothermia in water this cold was almost instant. They made it across, reached the far tree line. Flint risked a look back. 6 riders had emerged from the forest. They sat on their horses at the meadow edge, maybe 300 yards away. Even at this distance, Flint could make out individual shapes. Daniel Marsh in the lead, recognizable by his buffalo coat. Sheriff Clayton beside him. 4 other men, their faces indistinct in the gray light. And in front of the riders, 6 hounds. Blue-tick coonhounds from the look of them, bred for tracking in rough terrain. They strained at their leashes, pulling toward Flint and Sarah with single-minded determination. One of the riders pointed across the meadow. Daniel Marsh raised his hand, gestured forward. The posse began to move. Flint turned and ran. The next hour was a blur of exhaustion and desperation. Flint pushed through the forest at a pace he knew was unsustainable, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant dying. Sarah ran beside him, then behind him, then barely keeping up at all. Her breathing was harsh and labored, each breath a small sob of effort. The hounds grew closer. Flint could hear individual dogs now, could distinguish between their different voices. The lead dog had a deep, booming bay. The others answered in a chorus of higher-pitched yips and howls. They were maybe 10 minutes behind now, maybe less. The forest began to thin again. Through the trees ahead, Flint saw a break in the terrain, a ravine maybe 20 feet deep, cutting across their path like a scar in the earth. He ran to the edge, looked down. The bottom was choked with snow and fallen timber. Impassable on foot, but it stretched east and west as far as he could see. To go around would take time they did not have. "We have to jump," Flint said. Sarah looked at him like he had lost his mind. "That is 20 feet. 18, and it is our only chance." Flint backed up, getting a running start. "The dogs cannot follow. It will buy us time. Or kill us. Better than what they will do if they catch us." He ran, 4 long strides to build speed, then launched himself into empty air. For a moment he hung suspended, the ravine yawning beneath him. Nothing but space and the possibility of broken bones. Then he hit the far side, his body slamming into the snow-covered slope 6 feet below the lip. He scrabbled for purchase, fingers digging into frozen earth, and dragged himself up and over the edge. He turned. Sarah stood on the far side, her face white with fear. "I cannot," she said. "You can. Run fast. Jump far. I will catch you." "Flint, trust me." The baying of the hounds was very close now. Sarah looked over her shoulder, then back at Flint. She backed up, took a breath, and ran. She was lighter than Flint, and her jump carried her farther. But not far enough. She hit the slope 3 feet below the lip and immediately began to slide. Flint threw himself forward, caught her wrist with both hands. Her weight nearly pulled him over the edge, but he dug his heels in and held on. "I have got you," he said through gritted teeth. "Climb." Sarah clawed her morsel up the slope, using Flint as an anchor. Her feet slipped, found purchase, slipped again. But slowly, inch by inch, she made progress. Finally, she reached the top and collapsed beside him, gasping. Behind them, the hounds arrived at the ravine edge. They ran back and forth, baying in frustration, unable to follow. The riders would have to go around, find a crossing point. That would take time. Not much, but maybe enough. Flint hauled Sarah to her feet, and they ran again. The sun finally broke over the mountains, turning the world from gray to blinding white. Flint squinted against the glare, his eyes watering. Everything hurt now. His feet were wooden stumps he could barely control. His lungs burned. His muscles screamed with every step. But he did not stop. Through the trees ahead, he saw smoke, a thin gray column rising into the pale morning sky. "There," he said, his voice a rasp. "That is it. That has to be it." They broke from the tree line into a cleared area. A small cabin sat in the center, well-maintained, with a stone chimney and a neat split-rail fence around a garden plot. Smoke rose from the chimney. 3 goats huddled in a pen beside the cabin. A single horse, an old mare, stood in a lean-to shelter. Ruth McKenna's homestead. It had to be. Flint and Sarah stumbled across the clearing. Every step was agony now. Flint's vision was starting to blur at the edges, hypothermia setting in. His body was shutting down, conserving heat for vital organs, abandoning the extremities. He had maybe 10 minutes before he collapsed, maybe less. They reached the cabin door. Flint raised his hand to knock, but the door opened before his fist could fall. An old woman stood there, 70 years old at least, but straight-backed and clear-eyed. She had silver hair pulled into a severe bun and wore a heavy wool dress with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. In her hands, she held a Spencer rifle, the brass receiver gleaming dully in the morning light. The barrel was pointed directly at Flint's chest. "Who the hell are you?" Her voice was sharp, suspicious. "James Carson," Flint managed. His tongue felt thick in his mouth. "Lucas Brennan," he said, "you might help." "Lucas?" The woman's expression shifted slightly. "Where is he?" "Do not know. He helped us escape, warned us, told us to come here." "And who is this?" The rifle barrel shifted to point at Sarah. "Sarah Hartwell, from Ashford Creek. They—" Flint swayed on his feet. "Please, there is a posse coming. 6 men. They want to kill her." The old woman studied them for a long moment. Flint could see her making calculations, weighing risks. Then she lowered the rifle. "Get inside, both of you, quickly." Flint took one step forward. His legs gave out. He felt himself falling, felt Sarah falling beside him. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was the old woman's weathered face, hard lines softening into something that might have been compassion. When consciousness returned, Flint was lying on something soft, too soft. His mind struggled to process this information. He had been sleeping on frozen ground for so long that the concept of a bed seemed foreign. He opened his eyes, a ceiling made of rough-hewn logs, a stone fireplace with a fire crackling cheerfully, the smell of soup cooking, warmth, actual warmth, not the memory of warmth, but the real thing soaking into his bones. He tried to sit up. Pain exploded through his entire body, so intense he gasped and fell back against the pillows. "Stay down, you damned fool." The old woman appeared beside the bed. Up close, Flint could see she had the kind of face that comes from a lifetime of hard work and harder losses. Deep lines around her eyes and mouth, hands that were calloused and strong. "You have been unconscious for 3 days." 3 days, Flint's voice was a croak. "You nearly died. Both feet with severe frostbite, hypothermia, exhaustion, dehydration. Take your pick." She pressed a cup of water to his lips. "Drink slowly." Flint drank. The water was cool and sweet, the best thing he had ever tasted. When he finished, he asked the question that mattered most. "Sarah?" "The woman is fine, resting in the other room. She woke up yesterday, ate like a horse, then slept another 12 hours." The old woman set the cup aside. "She told me everything, what they did to her in Ashford Creek, red sky, her brother, you pulling a fool stunt and carrying her halfway across Montana in a blizzard. Is she really fine?" "As fine as can be expected for a woman who has been through what she has been through." The old woman crossed her arms. "The baby is fine too. 4 months along, she says. Red skies, child." Flint nodded carefully, moving his head hurt. "I am Ruth McKenna," the old woman said. "This is my home, and for now you are safe here." "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet. There is still a posse out there looking for you. They think you died in a fire at that old trading post. But Daniel Marsh is not the type to take things on faith. He has men checking every homestead within 20 miles. Then we should leave. We are putting you in danger. You are not going anywhere for at least a week. Look at your feet." Flint looked down. Both feet were wrapped in clean linen bandages, elevated on pillows. He could see dark stains seeping through the fabric, blood and other fluids. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad enough that I considered taking the toes off with a bone saw." Ruth's voice was matter of fact. "But I decided to try the old ways first. Soaked your feet in warm water mixed with salt and herbs. Applied poultices of comfrey and calendula to prevent infection. Fed you willow bark tea for the pain, though you were too unconscious to know it." "Will I keep the toes?" "Yes, but it was close. Another hour in that cold and I would have been cutting. As it is, you will be in pain for weeks. Might walk with a limp for the rest of your life. But you will walk." Flint absorbed this information. A limp was a small price to pay for being alive. "What about the posse? They came yesterday. Daniel Marsh and 5 others. Rode right up to my door, bold as brass." Ruth's eyes glittered with old anger. "Asked if I had seen a cowboy and a woman. I told them no. Daniel did not believe me, but there was a snowstorm coming, and they decided to head back to town rather than search the place. They will come back, probably, but the storm I mentioned? It hit hard, dumped another 2 feet of snow. Roads are impassable now. Even with horses, they would not make it out of Ashford Creek. We have maybe a week before the weather clears enough for them to try again. A week, not much time, but more than Flint had expected. Where is Lucas Brennan? Ruth's expression changed. Something passed across her face. There and gone so quickly Flint almost missed it. Grief, maybe, or resignation. Lucas is dead. The words hit like a physical blow. What? They found him 3 days ago, shot in the back on the Eastern Road. The posse claims he confessed to helping you escape before they executed him for treason. Ruth's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who had cried all their tears long ago. I do not believe the confession part. Lucas was many things, but he was not a traitor. He was just a young man who finally found the courage to do the right thing. Flint closed his eyes. He had barely known Lucas Brennan. A few conversations, a warning in the night, but the young deputy had risked everything to help two strangers, and it had cost him his life. Does Sarah know? Flint asked. Yes, she took it hard, cried for hours. Ruth stood, moved to the window, looked out at the snow-covered landscape. Lucas was the only person in that town who showed her any kindness, and now he is dead because of it. They were quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind howled and snow fell in thick curtains. Inside, the fire crackled and warmth pressed against the cold. I want to tell you a story, Ruth said. She did not turn from the window. About why I help people like you and Sarah. Why I live out here alone instead of in town where it would be easier. Flint waited. I had a son once, Ruth began, Jacob. He was a doctor, a good one, studied back east, came home to Montana to set up a practice. He was 25 years old, full of idealism and hope. Wanted to help everyone, white and Indian alike. She paused, her fingers gripping the windowsill. Jacob fell in love with a Lakota woman named Morningstar. She was beautiful and kind and smart. They wanted to marry, wanted to build a life together, but Ashford Creek said no, said they would not accept a squaw, said Jacob was betraying his race. Ruth turned from the window. Her eyes were dry, but haunted. This was 1868, 15 years ago. Jacob married Morningstar anyway. Lakota ceremony. Then they tried to leave, to go to her tribe's territory where they could live in peace. But Samuel Marsh, Daniel and Clayton's father, he led a group of men after them. Flint could see where this was going. He had heard too many stories like it. They caught Jacob and Morningstar on the trail, beat Jacob half to death with rifle butts and fists, shot Morningstar 4 times, left them both in the snow to die. Ruth's voice never wavered. She had told this story before, Flint realized. Told it to herself over and over until the words had worn smooth as river stones. Jacob lived for 2 more days, long enough for me to find him, long enough to tell me what happened. Then he died in my arms. Ruth moved back to the bed, sat down heavily in the chair. I buried him and Morningstar together on a hill overlooking this valley. Then I left Ashford Creek and never went back. You could have had revenge, Flint said quietly. Killed Samuel Marsh. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. Spent a year planning it. How I would do it. Where. When. Ruth shook her head. But then I realized that revenge would not bring Jacob back. It would not heal the wound. It would just make me like them. So instead, I built this place. Stayed close enough to know what was happening in that town, but far enough to be free of it. And when people come running from the same hate that killed my son, I help them. She looked at Flint directly. That is why you are here. That is why Sarah is here, not because I am a good person. I am not. I am a bitter old woman who has outlived everyone she loved. But I will be damned if I let Daniel Marsh do to you what his father did to my Jacob. Flint understood. Some wounds never healed. You just learned to build your life around the scar tissue. Over the next 3 days, Flint regained his strength slowly. Ruth was a skilled healer, trained in both frontier medicine and Lakota remedies she had learned from Morningstar. She changed his bandages twice daily, checking for signs of infection, applied fresh poultices of herbs that smelled sharp and green, fed him soup and bread and strong tea that tasted like pine needles and helped with the pain. The feeling returned to his feet gradually, first as tingling, then as burning, then as deep throbbing pain that made him grit his teeth. Ruth said this was good. Pain meant the nerves were healing, meant the tissue was damaged but not dead. On the 4th day, Ruth allowed him to see Sarah. She was sitting in the other bedroom, in a rocking chair by the window, wrapped in a quilt. Her hair had started to grow back, a dark fuzz covering her scalp. In the morning light, she looked younger than she had in Ashford Creek. The fear had gone out of her eyes, replaced by something harder. Determination, maybe. Or just the stubborn will to survive. "You are awake," Sarah said when Flint limped into the room. Her face brightened. "Ruth said you almost died." Ruth exaggerates. Flint lowered himself into a second chair, moving carefully. Everything still hurt. "She said your feet were frozen solid, that you should not have been able to walk at all, let alone carry me 8 miles through a blizzard. I am stubborn." "You are crazy." But Sarah was smiling. It was a small smile, tentative but real. "Thank you for everything, for saving me, for not leaving me in the snow. You would have done the same. I would not have had the strength." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow fall outside. It was coming down heavy again, big flakes that stuck to the window glass and melted slowly. "Ruth told you about Lucas?" Flint said. It was not a question. Sarah's smile disappeared. "Yes, I am sorry." "So am I." Sarah's hand moved to her stomach, a gesture Flint was starting to recognize. Protection, instinct. He was the only one who tried to help. The only one in that whole damn town who saw me as a person instead of a problem to be solved. He died for what he believed in. Not many people can say that. "He should not have had to die at all." Sarah's voice was fierce. "He should be alive. Lucas, Red Sky, my brother Thomas, they should all be alive. But they are dead because people could not accept something as simple as kindness." Flint did not have an answer for that. She was right. The world was full of small cruelties dressed up as righteousness, and good people died because of it. That was just the truth of things. "There is something you should know," Sarah said. She was not looking at him now. Her eyes were fixed on the window, on the snow. "About the baby. You do not have to." "I want to." Sarah took a breath. "I loved Red Sky, really loved him. Not because he helped me financially, not because I was desperate or lonely. I loved him because he was a good man, kind and gentle and wise in ways the people of Ashford Creek could never understand." She finally looked at Flint. "We were together, as man and woman, 3 times. He asked me first each time, made sure I wanted it, made sure I understood what it meant. And I said yes because I wanted to be with him, because I chose him." Flint nodded. He had suspected as much. "The town assumed I was a whore," Sarah continued, "but I was not. I was a woman in love, and this baby is the result of that love. The only piece of Red Sky I have left." Her hand pressed against her stomach. "I am going to raise this child proud. I am going to tell them about their father, about his courage and his kindness. And I am going to make damn sure they never feel ashamed of who they are." "Good," Flint said simply. "You are not disgusted?" "Why would I be?" "Because it is a half-breed child, because people will call them a bastard, because I am an unwed mother carrying an Indian's baby." Flint leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Sarah, my sister died because people judged her for loving someone they decided was wrong. I will not make that mistake twice. You loved Red Sky. He loved you. That baby is the result of that love. Anyone who has a problem with it can go to hell." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away quickly. "You are a good man, James Carson." "I'm trying to be." They talked for another hour. About Red Sky, about the baby, about what would happen next. Ruth had told Sarah about Red Bluff, a town 80 miles west that was known for accepting people regardless of their past. There was work there, Ruth said, a place they could start over. But first they had to survive the next week. First they had to make sure Daniel Marsh did not find them. On the 5th day, a rider appeared. Ruth saw him first. She was outside checking on the goats when the figure emerged from the tree line, moving slowly on an exhausted horse. She called out a warning, and Flint grabbed his Winchester despite the pain in his feet and positioned himself by the window. The rider came closer. Flint could see he was alone, wearing a deputy's coat. For a moment, Flint's heart leaped, thinking somehow Lucas had survived. But this man was different. Older, heavier set. The rider stopped 30 yards from the cabin. He raised his hands, showing they were empty. "Mrs. McKenna," he called out. "My name is Eugene Porter. I am deputy from Silver Springs, 2 towns over. I am not here to cause trouble." Ruth stepped out onto the porch, her Spencer rifle in hand. "State your business." "I have a message from the territorial marshal about the situation in Ashford Creek." Flint moved to the door, opened it slightly. "What kind of message?" The deputy turned toward Flint's voice. You would be James Carson? Maybe. The marshal wants you to know that charges have been filed against Daniel Marsh and several others for the murder of Deputy Lucas Brennan. There is an investigation, federal jurisdiction. The marshal is coming to Ashford Creek personally to take statements. Flint and Ruth exchanged glances. Why would the marshal care about a dead deputy in a nowhere town? Flint called back. Because Lucas Brennan sent a letter 3 days before he died. Sent it to the marshal's office in Helena. Detailed everything, the treatment of Sarah Hartwell, the mob violence, the corruption in Ashford Creek. The marshal wants to talk to both of you, to Sarah especially. And if we do not want to talk, then Daniel Marsh walks free. The deputy shifted in his saddle. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me, but Lucas was a friend of mine. We trained together 5 years ago. He was a good man. He deserves justice. And the only way he gets it is if you two testify about what happened. Flint looked at Ruth. She nodded slightly. Wait there, Flint called to the deputy. We will come out. It took 10 minutes to get ready. Flint could walk now, though each step sent pain shooting up his legs. Sarah emerged from her room wrapped in Ruth's old coat. Together, the three of them walked out to meet Deputy Porter. Up close, Flint could see the man was tired. His face was windburned and haggard. He had been riding hard for days. The marshal's at the McKenna place now? Flint asked. No, sir. He is still 2 days out. But he sent me ahead to find you, to make sure you were safe. Porter looked at Sarah. Miss Hartwell, the marshal wants to hear your story, all of it, from the beginning. Why? Sarah's voice was wary. Why would he care what happened to me? Because Lucas's letter made it clear that what happened in Ashford Creek was not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern. The marshal wants to know how deep the corruption goes. Porter pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is a letter of safe conduct, signed by the marshal. It guarantees your protection if you agree to testify. Sarah took the letter, read it carefully. Then she looked at Flint. What do you think? Flint thought about Lucas, shot in the back for trying to do the right thing. Thought about Red Sky, dying alone because no white doctor would treat him. Thought about his sister Sarah, hanging in a barn because a town had decided her love was shameful. I think Lucas deserves justice, Flint said. And I think testifying is the only way he gets it. Sarah nodded slowly. Then we testify. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Deputy Porter stayed at Ruth's homestead, sleeping in the barn, keeping watch. He told them more about the investigation, about how Lucas's letter had detailed specific names and specific crimes. If Sarah and Flint corroborated the account, the marshal would have enough to bring federal charges against Daniel Marsh, Reverend Hartley, and several others. It would not bring Lucas back, but it might prevent the same thing from happening to someone else. On the 7th day, the marshal arrived. He was a tall man in his 50s, with iron gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His name was Thomas Blackwood, and he had been a territorial marshal for 23 years. He had seen everything the frontier had to offer, and very little of it surprised him anymore. He took statements from Flint and Sarah separately, writing everything down in a leather-bound notebook. He asked questions, good questions, the kind that showed he understood what had really happened in Ashford Creek. When they were finished, he closed the notebook and looked at them both. I am going to Ashford Creek tomorrow, he said. I am going to arrest Daniel Marsh, Clayton Marsh, and Abel Hartley. I'm going to charge them with conspiracy, assault, and in Daniel's case, murder. I want you both to know that this will not be easy. There will be a trial. You will have to testify publicly. And there will be people in Ashford Creek who will hate you for it. They already hate me, Sarah said quietly. Fair point. Blackwood almost smiled. The question is whether you are willing to go through with it. Because if you are not, I understand. You have already been through hell. No one would blame you for walking away. Sarah looked at Flint. He could see the question in her eyes. What happens if we do not testify? Flint asked. I can probably make the case against Daniel Marsh stick based on Lucas's letter alone. The murder charge will hold, but the others will walk. Clayton, Hartley, the men who participated in the mob, they will all go free. And they will do it again, Sarah said, to someone else. Blackwood nodded. That is my concern. Sarah stood. She walked to the window, looked out at the mountains. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. I will testify. I will tell everyone what they did, what they are, and if they hate me for it, then they can add it to the list. She turned back to face them. But I want something in return. Name it, Blackwood said. I want protection for me and for my baby. And I want a guarantee that once the trial is over, Ashford Creek will leave me alone. Forever. I can arrange that. The federal government can issue an order of protection. Anyone who violates it will face federal charges. Then we have a deal. The marshal left the next day to make his arrests. Flint, Sarah, and Ruth stayed at the homestead, waiting. 3 days later, Deputy Porter returned with news. Daniel Marsh had been arrested without incident. Clayton Marsh had resigned as sheriff and agreed to testify against his brother in exchange for a reduced sentence. Reverend Hartley had fled, but the marshal had men tracking him. The trial would best be in 3 months, in Helena, the territorial capital. Until then, Sarah and Flint would stay with Ruth under the protection of the territorial marshal's office. It was not quite freedom, but it was the beginning of something that looked like justice. On a cold morning, 2 weeks after the marshal's visit, Flint woke to find Sarah sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the sunrise. He limped out to join her. His feet were healing slowly. He could walk without pain now, though Ruth said he would always have a slight limp. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Tired, scared, hopeful." Sarah smiled. "All of it at once." "That seems about right." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gray to pink to gold. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of amber and rose. "I have been thinking," Sarah said, "about the baby, about what comes after the trial." "What have you been thinking?" "That I want to go to Red Bluff, start over somewhere no one knows me, somewhere I can raise this child without shame." She looked at him. "Ruth says there is work there, good people, a school." "Sounds like a plan." "I want you to come with me." The words hung in the air between them. Flint had been expecting this, but hearing it still made something tighten in his chest. "Sarah, I am not asking you to marry me," Sarah said quickly. "I am not asking for anything romantic. I know you still carry your sister's letter. I know that grief. But I am asking for partnership, for friendship, for someone who will help me protect this child and give them a chance at a good life." Flint looked out at the sunrise. He thought about his sister, about all the years he had spent carrying her death like a stone in his pocket, about the vow he had made never to let someone suffer alone the way she had. "Yes," he said, "I will come to Red Bluff." Sarah's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you. On one condition." "Name it." "You let me teach that child to ride and shoot. The world is not kind. They will need to know how to defend themselves." "Deal." Sarah held out her hand. Flint shook it. The grip was firm and warm and full of promise. Spring came slowly to Montana. The snow melted in fits and starts, revealing brown grass and mud. The trial happened in April, in a courthouse in Helena that was packed with spectators. Sarah testified for 3 hours, her voice never wavering, telling the whole truth of what had happened in Ashford Creek. Daniel Marsh was convicted of murder and sentenced to 20 years. Clayton Marsh received 5 years. Reverend Hartley, who had been caught trying to flee to California, received 10 years. The town of Ashford Creek, shamed by the national attention the trial attracted, began to empty out. Families moved away. Businesses closed. Within 2 years, it would be a ghost town, the kind of place people rode past without stopping. But that was later. For now, in the spring of 1883, Flint and Sarah left Helena and headed west toward Red Bluff. They rode Ruth's old horse, taking turns walking to spare the animal. The journey took 2 weeks. When they finally saw Red Bluff on the horizon, both of them stopped to look. It was bigger than Ashford Creek. More people, more life. The main street was busy with wagons and horses. Flint could see a general store, a blacksmith, a school, a church. And everywhere, people of different colors and backgrounds working side by side. "This is it," Sarah said. "This is home." Flint looked at her, at the hope in her face, at the slight curve of her belly where Red Sky's child grew. And he thought about his sister, about Lucas, about all the people who had not lived to see this moment. "Yes," he said, "this is home." They rode into Red Bluff together, ready to begin again. Red Bluff appeared through the afternoon haze like a mirage made solid. After 2 weeks of riding through the Montana wilderness, sleeping under stars and cooking over small fires, the sight of civilization felt almost unreal. Flint Carson guided Ruth McKenna's old mare down the last hill, Sarah Hartwell seated behind him, her arms wrapped loosely around his waist. The town sprawled across a broad valley where 3 creeks converged. Maybe 50 buildings, twice the size of Ashford Creek. But size was not what caught Flint's attention. It was the people. On the main street below, he could see white faces and brown faces and black face, all moving together without the tension that had defined every other frontier town he had known. A Chinese man carried lumber from a wagon. A Mexican woman swept the porch of what looked like a boarding house. Two children, one white and one that might have been Cheyenne, played with a dog in the street. "Is it real?" Sarah whispered behind him. "Or am I seeing what I want to see?" "Only one way to find out," Flint said. They rode down the main street slowly, drawing a few curious glances but nothing hostile. No one stared at Sarah's short hair, now grown out to about 2 inches, dark and soft as duck down. No one pointed at her belly, which had grown more prominent in the weeks since the trial. She was 5 months along now, her pregnancy impossible to hide under even the loose dresses Ruth had given her. The general store sat at the center of town, a 2-story building with a sign that read Gray's Mercantile in neat painted letters. Flint dismounted, then helped Sarah down. Her feet had healed completely from the frostbite, but she moved carefully these days, protective of the life growing inside her. The store's interior was dim and cool after the bright sunlight. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from canned goods to fabric to farming tools. The smell was familiar and comforting. Tobacco and leather and coffee and spices all mixed together. A woman stood behind the counter, sorting through a ledger. She was maybe 60 years old, black, with silver streaks through her tightly braided hair. She wore a practical blue dress with an apron over it, and reading glasses perched on her nose. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp and assessing. "Help you folks?" Her voice was cultured, educated. Not what Flint had expected in a frontier general store. "Looking for Martha Gray," Flint said. "Ruth McKenna sent us." The woman's expression changed instantly. The wariness disappeared, replaced by something warmer. "Ruth, how is that stubborn old woman?" "Still stubborn," Sarah said, and there was fondness in her voice. "Still healing people who probably do not deserve it." Martha came around the counter, moving with the easy confidence of someone who owned her space completely. "Ruth McKenna saved my life 20 years ago. Hid me in her barn when I was running from slave catchers. This was before the war, before emancipation. I was 19 years old and scared out of my mind." She looked at Sarah and Flint, really looked at them, and Flint knew she was seeing more than just two tired travelers. She was seeing the story written in Sarah's short hair, in Flint's careful way of walking, in the way they stood close together without touching. "You are running too," Martha said. It was not a question. "We were," Sarah replied. "The running is done now. We are just looking for a place to start over." Martha nodded slowly. "Ruth's letter said you would be coming. Did not say when, but Ruth has a way of knowing these things." She pulled an envelope from her apron pocket, already opened. "She told me what happened in Ashford Creek, what they did to you." Sarah stiffened slightly. Flint saw her hand move toward her stomach, that protective gesture that had become second nature. "I do not want pity," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I just want work, a place to live, a chance to raise my child in peace." "No pity here," Martha said firmly. "Just respect for someone who survived what should have killed them." She turned to Flint. "Ruth says you are good with horses and cattle. That true?" "Been working with animals since I was 8 years old." "Can you handle a hammer? Fix things?" "Well enough." "Good. Tom Garcia runs the livery stable 2 blocks east. He has been complaining for months that he needs help. Tell him I sent you. If he gives you trouble, tell him I will cut off his credit at the store." Martha turned back to Sarah. "And you? Ruth says you were a teacher." "I was, until they decided I was not fit to be around children." "Well, Red Bluff disagrees. We have a school, 23 students, ages 6 to 14. The teacher, Mrs. Wilson, is 72 and threatening to retire every other week. She could use an assistant." Martha paused. "The pay is $3 a week. Not much, but honest." "I will take it," Sarah said without hesitation. "Good. School starts at 8 in the morning. You can begin Monday." Martha moved to a door at the back of the store. "Come on, I have a room upstairs. It is small, but it is clean and the rent is reasonable." The room was indeed small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, with a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove for cooking, and one window that looked out over the main street. But it was clean, as Martha had promised, and it was theirs. $10 a month, Martha said, payable on the 1st. That includes firewood and use of the pump out back. Flint did the math in his head. Between his work and Sarah's teaching, they could afford it with enough left over for food. Oh, see, barely, but barely was enough. "We will take it," he said. Martha smiled. It transformed her face, taking 20 years off her age. "Welcome to Red Bluff." Over the next 3 months, Flint and Sarah built a life from nothing. It was not easy. Nothing worth having ever was. But it was theirs, and that made all the difference. Flint started at the livery stable the next morning. Tom Garcia was a stocky Mexican man in his 40s with hands like iron and a laugh that could shake rafters. He took one look at Flint's careful walk and said, "You got a bad leg?" "Frostbite, happened in January, still healing." "Can you work with it?" "I can work." Tom grunted. "Then we will see. I need someone who can shoe horses, repair tack, and not mind getting kicked now and then. Pay is $4 a week. You start now." The work was hard but familiar. Flint had spent half his life around horses, and his hands remembered the rhythms even when his body protested. By the end of the first week, Tom had increased his pay to $5. By the end of the first month, they were working side by side like they had been partners for years. Sarah started teaching on Monday as promised. Mrs. Wilson was indeed 72, white-haired and bent with age, but sharp as a tack. She watched Sarah teach for one day, nodded in satisfaction, and promptly reduced her own hours to mornings only. "You have the gift," Mrs. Wilson told Sarah. "The children trust you. That is rare." The children of Red Bluff were a mixed group, white and Mexican and Chinese and Native American, all learning together in one room. Some could barely read. Others were hungry for every scrap of knowledge Sarah could give them. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic, but also history and geography and science. She taught them about the world beyond Red Bluff, about possibilities they might never have imagined. And when one of the older boys, a white child named Michael, asked why Miss Hartwell's hair was so short, she told them the truth. "I was punished by people who thought I had done something wrong," she said. "They shaved my head to shame me, but they were the ones who should have been ashamed, not me." The children absorbed this with the straightforward acceptance of youth. After that, no one mentioned her hair again. In the evenings, Flint and Sarah would sit in their small room and talk about the day, about the baby, about the future they were building one careful step at a time. "I felt the baby move today," Sarah said one night in early July. She was 6 months along now, her belly round and prominent. "Really move, like butterfly wings inside me." Flint had been cleaning his Winchester, a ritual he performed every evening out of habit. He set the rifle aside. "Is that normal?" "According to Mrs. Chen at the boarding house, perfectly normal. She has had 6 children. She says the baby is getting stronger, preparing to be born." "Are you scared?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Terrified. Women die in childbirth all the time, and I will be alone. No mother, no sister, no husband." "You will not be alone," Flint said. "I will be there, and Martha, and Mrs. Chen, and half the women in this town if you ask them." "It is not the same as family." "Maybe family is not just blood," Flint said. "Maybe it is people who choose to stand by you." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, small but genuine. "When did you become a philosopher?" "Must be all the time spent with horses. They are very Western." She laughed, and Flint realized it was the first time he had heard her laugh since before Ashford Creek. The sound was rusty, like something long unused, but it was real. Summer deepened into fall. The aspens turned gold on the mountainsides. The air grew crisp in the mornings, and Flint knew winter was coming. But this winter, they would face it with a roof over their heads and food in their bellies and a community that accepted them. That made all the difference. In late September, a letter arrived from Ruth McKenna. Flint collected it from the post office and brought it back to their room. Sarah opened it carefully, reading aloud in the lamplight. "Dear Sarah and James, I hope this letter finds you well and settled in Red Bluff. I wanted you to know that Ashford Creek is no more. The last families moved away in August. The buildings stand empty now. Coyotes have moved into some of the houses. The church bell that used to ring every Sunday morning is silent. I do not mourn its passing. That town was built on hate and judgment, and it died the same way. Good riddance. I have news about those who hurt you. Daniel Marsh died in prison last month, stabbed by another inmate. Some might call it justice. I call it sad. Not sad that he is gone, but sad that he wasted his whole life on bitterness and never learned better. Clayton Marsh was released early for good behavior. He moved to California. I heard he is working on a ranch, keeping his head down, not bothering anyone. Maybe prison changed him. Maybe it did not. Either way, he is gone. Reverend Hartley is still serving his sentence. The last I heard, he spends his time in the prison chapel praying. I wonder what he prays for. Forgiveness, probably. I hope he finds it, though I doubt I could give it to him if he asked. As for me, I am well. My goats are fat and happy. The garden produced more vegetables than I can eat. I have been teaching some of the local Cheyenne about white man's medicine, and they have been teaching me more about their healing ways. It is a fair trade. I think about you both often. About that baby coming. I wish I could be there to see them born, but these old bones do not travel well anymore. Know that you are in my thoughts and prayers, such as they are. Live well. Love that child fiercely. And remember that the best revenge against people who tried to break you is to build a life so full of joy that their hate cannot touch it. With affection, Ruth. Sarah folded the letter carefully, her eyes shining with tears. She is a good woman. The best, Flint agreed. I want to name the baby after her. If it is a girl, Ruth, or if it is a boy, maybe the middle name. Flint nodded. It seemed right. October brought the first snow. Not much, just a dusting that melted by noon. But it was a reminder that winter was coming, and with it, the baby. Sarah was 7 months along now, moving slowly, her back aching, her feet swollen. Martha had given her lighter duties at the school, mostly sitting and helping children with reading, while Mrs. Wilson handled the more active lessons. In the evenings, Mrs. Chen from the boarding house would visit, bringing tea and advice. The baby will come early, Mrs. Chen predicted, studying Sarah's belly with an experienced eye. Maybe November. You are carrying low, that means soon. How soon, Sarah asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. You should prepare. They prepared. Flint built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth so there were no splinters. Sarah sewed tiny clothes from fabric Martha sold her at cost. They stockpiled firewood and food and clean water. And they waited. The baby came on November 3rd, during the first real snowstorm of the season. Sarah's labor started just after midnight. She woke Flint with a hand on his shoulder, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. It is time, she said. Flint was on his feet instantly, heart hammering. I will get Mrs. Chen. No time. The contractions are close already. This baby is coming fast. Flint had helped deliver foals and calves, but never a human child. Still, the basics were the same. He built up the fire, boiled water, laid out clean cloths. Sarah walked the room between contractions, her hand pressed to her lower back, breathing through the pain. At 2 in the morning, Flint ran to get Mrs. Chen and Martha despite Sarah's protests. They came immediately, Mrs. Chen carrying a bag of supplies, Martha bringing clean sheets. You did good calling us, Mrs. Chen said, examining Sarah quickly. But she was right. This baby is coming very fast. Maybe too fast. Is that bad? Sarah asked through gritted teeth. Not bad, just intense. First babies usually take longer, but this one is in a hurry. The next 4 hours were a blur of pain and effort and encouragement. Sarah labored on her feet, then on her knees, then finally on the bed with Mrs. Chen and Martha supporting her. Flint stayed by her head, letting her squeeze his hand hard enough to leave bruises, wiping her forehead with cool cloths. I cannot, Sarah gasped at one point. I cannot do this. Yes, you can, Martha said firmly. You have survived worse than this. You can survive this too. One more push, Mrs. Chen urged. Big push, now. Sarah bore down with everything she had left. And then suddenly there was a cry. Not Sarah's cry, a different one. High and thin and unmistakably alive. It is a boy, Mrs. Chen announced, holding up a tiny red-faced creature covered in fluid and blood. A strong boy with good lungs. She placed the baby on Sarah's chest. Sarah's hands came up automatically, cradling the small head, touching the tiny fingers. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Hello, she whispered. Hello, little one. Flint looked at the baby and felt something crack open in his chest. The child had dark hair, still wet and plastered to his skull. His skin was lighter than Red Sky's would have been, darker than Sarah's. His eyes, when they opened, were the color of storm clouds. Sarah's eyes. "He is perfect," Sarah said, her voice full of wonder. "He is perfect," Mrs. Chen cut the cord, cleaned the baby, wrapped him in soft cloth. Martha cleaned Sarah, changed the bedding, made tea. Through it all, Sarah held her son, counting his fingers and toes, studying every inch of his face. When everything was settled and Mrs. Chen and Martha had left with promises to check back in the morning, Flint sat beside the bed, looking at Sarah and the baby. "What will you name him?" he asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking down at her son. "Thomas James Red Sky Hartwell," she said finally. "Thomas for my brother, James for you, Red Sky for his father." "Hartwell," Flint repeated. "Not Carson?" "I thought," Sarah looked up at him, "if you wanted, if you planned to stay, we could be Hartwell Carson. Both names, a family." Flint felt his throat tighten. He thought about his sister, about the vow he had made standing in that barn 6 years ago, about carrying Sarah through the snow, about building this fragile life together, piece by piece. "I would be honored," he said. Sarah smiled, tired but radiant. "Then welcome to the family, James Carson." The baby, Thomas James Red Sky Hartwell Carson, slept peacefully in his mother's arms, unaware that he had just been given a name that carried the weight of 3 men's legacies and 1 woman's fierce determination to raise him proud. Winter came hard and cold, but inside their small room above the general store, there was warmth. Thomas proved to be a healthy baby, nursing well, sleeping in predictable cycles, growing steadily. Sarah recovered from the birth with the resilience that had carried her through everything else. The town of Red Bluff embraced the new family. Martha brought food and diapers and offered to watch Thomas when Sarah went back to teaching after 6 weeks. Mrs. Chen taught Sarah about herbs that would help with milk production and healing. Tom Garcia made a small rocking horse for Thomas, even though the baby would not be able to use it for at least a year. "For when he is ready," Tom said, "every boy needs a horse." In February, when Thomas was 3 months old, a traveling photographer came through Red Bluff. Flint paid $2, money they could barely spare, to have a photograph taken. The 3 of them sat together, Sarah holding Thomas, Flint standing behind them with his hand on Sarah's shoulder. The photographer arranged them carefully, then ducked under his black cloth. "Hold very still," he instructed. "Do not move for 10 seconds. The flash powder went off with a bang and a burst of light. Thomas startled, but did not cry. And they had their photograph. Proof that they existed, proof that they had built something worth remembering. Spring came again, and with it, a letter from the Territorial Marshal's office. Daniel Marsh was dead. Clayton Marsh had been released. The case was officially closed. Sarah and Flint were free of any obligation to return to Helena. "It is over," Sarah said, reading the letter. "Really over." "Yes," Flint agreed, but he knew that some things were never really over. The scars remained, even after the wounds healed. Summer brought visitors. First, a young Cheyenne man named Standing Bear, who introduced himself as Red Sky's nephew. He had heard about Sarah and the baby from other tribes people who traded in Red Bluff. He wanted to see his uncle's child. Sarah invited him in without hesitation. Standing Bear sat on the floor, cross-legged, while Thomas crawled around him, pulling at his long braids. The young man laughed, gentle and patient. "He has Red Sky's eyes," Standing Bear said. "The shape, if not the color. And his hands. See how he reaches for things? Curious, always wanting to know. That was my uncle." "Tell me about him," Sarah said. "Tell me everything. I want Thomas to know his father." Standing Bear talked for 3 hours. About Red Sky's childhood, his vision quest at 15, his skill as a tracker and hunter, his kindness to children and elders, his love of stories. By the time Standing Bear left, Sarah had filled 5 pages with notes. "I will write it all down," she told Flint that night. "Everything Standing Bear said, and everything I remember. So Thomas will know, so he will understand where he comes from." In September, Ruth McKenna surprised them by actually making the journey to Red Bluff. She arrived on a wagon driven by a Cheyenne friend, looking frailer than Flint remembered, but still sharp-eyed and straight-backed. "I had to see this child," Ruth said, taking Thomas into her arms. He was 10 months old now, pulling himself up on furniture, babbling in a language only he understood. Had to see that something good came from all that suffering. She stayed for 2 weeks. In the evenings, after Thomas was asleep, the three of them would sit together and talk about Ashford Creek, about Jacob and Morningstar, about Red Sky and Lucas Brennan, about all the people who should have been there, but were not. You know what I realized, Ruth said on her last night? Hate is lazy. It is easy. It requires no thought, no effort, no growth. But love, real love, the kind that crosses boundaries and breaks rules, that takes courage, that takes strength. She looked at Sarah holding Thomas, at Flint sitting close enough to be part of the family but still giving them space. You three are what love looks like when it refuses to break. Remember that. Teach that boy that. Because the world will try to tell him he is wrong for existing. And he needs to know that the world is the one that is wrong, not him. The years passed. Thomas grew from baby to toddler to young boy. He learned to walk in Red Bluff's dusty streets, learned to talk in that small room above the general store, learned to read sitting on his mother's lap at the schoolhouse. He was 5 years old when Flint taught him to ride. They used Tom Garcia's gentlest horse, an old mare named Buttercup who moved like she was walking on clouds. Flint walked beside the horse, one hand on Thomas's back, while the boy gripped the saddle horn with both hands. "I am doing it," Thomas shouted. "Papa Flint, I am riding." Papa Flint. The name had come naturally, appearing one day when Thomas was 3 and never leaving. Flint had not asked for it, had not expected it, but hearing it never failed to make something warm bloom in his chest. That evening, sitting on the porch of the small house they had managed to rent at the edge of town, Sarah said, "You know he sees you as his father, not just Papa Flint, his father." "His father was Red Sky," Flint said carefully. "Red Sky gave him life, but you are teaching him how to live. That makes you his father too." Flint did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded. When Thomas was 6, the school held a program where children had to talk about their families. Thomas stood in front of the room, small and serious in his carefully pressed shirt. "I have 2 fathers," he said clearly. "One I never met, but my mother says he was brave and kind. His name was Red Sky, and he was Cheyenne. My other father is Papa Flint. He rescued my mother. He taught me to ride and to shoot and to tell the truth. I am lucky because I got the best parts of both of them." In the audience, Sarah cried. Flint found himself blinking hard against unexpected moisture in his own eyes. After the program, another parent approached them. A white woman, well-dressed, with the pinched look of someone perpetually dissatisfied. "That boy," she said, her voice carrying clear judgment. "He should not be confused about who his father is. It is unseemly." Flint felt old anger stir, but before he could speak, Martha Gray appeared at his elbow. "You know what is unseemly?" Martha said, her voice pleasant but her eyes hard as flint. "A grown woman judging a child for being loved by multiple people. Now, if you will excuse us, we have celebrating to do." The woman left in a huff. Martha winked at Flint. "Some people never learn," she said, "but do not let them poison what you have built here. That boy is happy and healthy and loved. That is all that matters." On a summer evening when Thomas was 7, the family sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. Thomas sat between Sarah and Flint, eating an apple and swinging his legs. "Papa Flint," Thomas said, "why do some people not like me?" It was the question Sarah and Flint had been dreading. The question they knew would come eventually. "What do you mean?" Sarah asked carefully. "Michael's mother, she told Michael not to play with me, said I was different." Sarah and Flint exchanged glances over Thomas's head. "You are different," Flint said. "But different is not bad. Different is just different." "But why do not they like it?" "Because people are afraid of things they do not understand," Sarah said. She pulled Thomas close. "Your father, Red Sky, was Cheyenne. I am white. That makes you mixed. Some people think that is wrong, but they are the ones who are wrong, not you. Is that why Mama's hair was short when you met her?" Sarah had told Thomas a simplified version of the story, how people had been unkind, how Flint had helped her. But she had never gone into details about the shaming, the violence, the hatred. "Yes," Sarah said simply, "people hurt me because I loved your father. They thought it was wrong for a white woman to love a Cheyenne man. But it was not wrong. It was the most right thing I ever did, because it gave me you. Thomas thought about this. Then he said with the straightforward logic of childhood, then those people are stupid. Flint barked a laugh. Yes. Yes, they are. Do not call people stupid, Sarah said automatically. Then she smiled. Even when they are. When Thomas turned 12, Standing Bear taught him to track deer through winter snow. When he turned 14, Doc Miller let him observe a surgery, a rancher's broken leg set with skill and care. Thomas watched, fascinated, asking questions that made the old doctor smile. You have the mind for this, Miller said. The patience, that is rare. Years passed, Red Bluff grew. More families arrived, a second school was built. A doctor set up practice. A lawyer opened an office. The town was becoming something more than just a frontier settlement. It was becoming a real community. Sarah eventually became the head teacher when Mrs. Wilson finally retired at age 79. She taught hundreds of children over the years, always making sure they understood that differences should be celebrated, not feared. Flint worked at the livery stable until Tom Garcia retired and sold him the business for a price so low it was practically a gift. You earned it, Tom said. You made this place better. It should be yours. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man, strong and kind, with his mother's gray eyes and his father's love of the natural world. He learned tracking from Standing Bear, who visited every summer. He learned medicine from the town doctor, who saw potential in the boy's careful hands and curious mind. By the time he was 15, Thomas knew he wanted to be a doctor. Like Jacob, Ruth said when she heard. She was 85 now, still alive through sheer stubbornness. Ruth McKenna's son was a doctor. He wanted to heal everyone, regardless of their color. Maybe Thomas will finish what Jacob started. Thomas did become a doctor. Ruth McKenna passed quietly in her sleep in the winter of 1898, 15 years after Thomas was born. Flint and Sarah made the journey to her homestead for the burial. They laid her beside Jacob and Morningstar on the hill she had chosen. Thomas, then 15, carved her headstone himself. Ruth McKenna, healer, friend. The hate could not break her. He studied in Denver, came back to Red Bluff, and opened a practice that served everyone. White patients and Cheyenne patients, and Mexican patients and Chinese patients. He treated everyone the same, with respect and skill and compassion. On a spring evening many years later, Flint sat on the porch of the house he and Sarah had eventually bought. He was 61 years old now, gray-haired and weathered, his limp more pronounced than ever. But he was alive, still here, still watching sunsets with Sarah beside him. Thomas visited that evening with news. His wife, a Mexican woman named Elena, was pregnant with their first child. We wanted you to be the first to know, Thomas said. You are going to be grandparents. Grandparents. Flint turned the word over in his mind. He thought about his sister, dead at 20, about Red Sky, who never got to meet his son, about Lucas Brennan, shot in the back for doing the right thing, about all the people who should have been there, but were not. We are going to name him Lucas, Thomas continued. If it is a boy, Lucas Red Sky Carson, for the deputy who saved my mother, and for my father, and for you. Sarah was crying quietly, happy tears this time. She reached over and took Flint's hand. Thank you, she said. Not to Thomas, to Flint. For everything, for saving me, for staying, for being the father Thomas needed, for building this life with me. Flint squeezed her hand. Thank you for letting me. That night, after Thomas had left and Sarah had gone to bed, Flint stood alone on the porch, looking up at the stars. He pulled out his sister's letter, the paper so worn now it was almost transparent. He read it one more time in the moonlight. I did it, Sarah, he said quietly to the darkness. I did not let them break me. I built something good, something worth protecting. I hope wherever you are, that you can see it, that you know it was all for you. He folded the letter carefully and put it away. Tomorrow he would show Thomas how to teach a horse to trust. Tomorrow Sarah would read to her students about people who changed the world through kindness. Tomorrow Elena would start knitting clothes for a baby who would carry 3 generations of love in his name. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Each one a small victory against the hate that had tried to destroy them. each one proof that love, the kind that refuses to break, was stronger than anything the world could throw at it. Flint went inside, closed the door against the night, and lay down beside the woman he had carried through the snow 30 years ago. She stirred in her sleep, moved closer, and he put his arm around her. They had survived. More than that, they had lived. And in the end, that was the only revenge that mattered.